wanted to talk today about horse training methods. You know, I see on YouTube a lot of different styles of horse training, and each one professing to have mastered the art of how to gentle horses, how to break them in or back them, however they want to say it these days, and problem horses. And you know, look, I find it very interesting. I've grown up around horses. My family had horses. My grandfather was a horse trainer, and actually going back generations, if I go back through my family ancestry as far back as I can go, people were horse trainers, so it's in my family line. My own father taught me first about how to, I'll use the word to be politically correct, gentle a horse when I was 14 years of age, and we leased a thoroughbred filly, and it'd been unhandled, and my father showed me from start to finish how to train her, take her from an unhandled state into a rideable and very good rideable mare actually, and but it did take me about 6 months using his processes, and I also wasn't allowed to use the saddle for 6 months because my father was very much into contact, and he said if you can't balance and if you can't read your horse and your horse can't read you, a saddle's pointless because you'll end up coming off and hurting yourself. So do it the hard way, Roz, and take your time and learn how to connect with your horse. If you want a successful partnership, you've got to learn how to connect, and don't always think it's the horse's fault. Anyway, after I first learnt the basics with my father, I was fortunate enough to come under the hands of a very experienced horse trainer named Bernie, and he taught me a lot of the basics that I still use in some form today on Brumbies. So I did a lot of my early training learning, and the methods that I use was probably not ideal. It was fast, you know, handling completely wild horses and getting them to a riding stage within a couple of weeks was hard work, was risky, you know, eventful. It wasn't good for the horse and really wasn't good for us, but served a purpose back in those days. And people, when I say back in those days, I'm meaning 45 years plus, because, you know, I'm an older person, and back in those days, training was pretty tough. Horse training methods were pretty tough. Nowadays, you see online a mixture of different sort of training techniques. If I have a preference, it'd probably be Warwickshire, because for me, he's come off the same sort of, he's around the same age group as me, and came off the same sort of methodologies, and along the way has altered his thinking, which I have too. And so, you know, if I was ever going to recommend, and I don't give anyone personal recommendations, but for me personally, if I've probably gained any wisdoms and insights, it's been mainly off Warwick, because I've enjoyed his journey and his thoughts and musings over the whole concept of horses and taming, gentling, starting out with youngsters, overcoming issues. I mean, both of my horses, or our horses I should say, were unhandled.
Not that heavy, you see. Are you done? You want some more? Yes, okay. There you go. Chomp her down.
Was that her tail, was it? Such a
Oh,
big
Billy,
girl.
You almost swallowed the whole bag.
She's
Oh, you want some more? Look at this guy.
I know. He's the bloody biggest baby around.
There we go.
Oh dear.
You spoiled little boy, aren't you?
Our war pony's a very spoilt boy.
Some more? More?
Yeah, he's trying to tell you to give him some more. Bloody hell, I tell you.
Don't worry, I'm getting it. Look. Not much in there, it's straw.
Yeah, let him do it himself. It'll keep him occupied for a while.
There you go. Here's the goodies. Here's the goodies here.
He's a shocker. I read a lot of social media sites, groups where horses are involved and horse training, different methods, how people started, problems. That seems to be the biggest issue in the horse world, is dealing with horse problems. Why does my horse bite me? Why does my horse try to kick me? Why does my horse not respect me? And you know, look, I think I've read it all over a period of time, and you know, and then I've also watched a lot of YouTube channels with different training methods, and if you do it my way, you'll have 100% success. And I'm not really into formulas, so look, I do have my favourite trainers, and I'd have to say, two of my favourite trainers the first one would be Warwick Schiller, because he's the same age group as me, been in horses about the same amount of time, changed his methods over the years and has adapted them, become more philosophical, which I have as well. And I don't look at everything as a problem, I just look at it as adaptation. So I do a lot of adapting with my horses versus do I see something as a problem. If there is a particular issue that someone wants to deal with, I like Ryan Rose. I often watch him, and I think there's another one, there's a British guy named Steve Horsemanship, and but what I notice with some of the, besides Warwick, with some of the other horse methods, it's usually the same thing. First of all is gaining control using, you know, a halter, rope halter, lunging around, respecting space, you know, the basics that most people, when they get a horse, should know how to do, particularly if they're going to pick up a problem horse or a horse that's not been handled. I mean, a lot of those are foundational sort of issues that you should put into your horse right from the start. And, you know, if you don't, I mean, inevitably you end up with a lot of problems. Anyway, my two horses, well, I should say our two horses, as you probably all know by now, Bill started out his life as a Brumby, and Bella started out her life at a breeder's in a mare's paddock. So neither one of them had been handled. Neither one of them really understood manners. I've never been really the boss type person when it comes to my horses. I prefer partnerships, although there are some things where I demand absolute etiquette, and one of them is not running me over, being mindful of my space, and that regardless of whether it's dinner time, whether they're playing, whether they're just being nosy, you know, whatever it is, if it's going to be invading my space and I don't want it, I'll move them out the way. I'll wave my arms and make them move back until I'm satisfied. Now, I don't use a whip, I don't use a spanky stick, I don't use anything other than my hands and the tone of my voice. I don't shout at my horses either. But look, they learned right from the start that if you cross my boundary, I remove myself and they don't get the pleasure of my company. Now that may sound like, oh, you know, that's ridiculous, your horse is just going to walk over the top of you. Well, that's not true actually, because the the first thing I did with both horses was to build a solid relationship, and that was just by spending a great deal of time with them. I still do spend a great deal of time. The other thing that I do with my horses, which sounds pretty crazy, I suppose, to some people, is I treat their training a bit like dog obedience. You know, there's sometimes I use rewards to draw them in and to keep them coming back for whatever behaviour I want, and repetition. Bella used to take a lot longer than Billy to process whatever it was that I was telling her to, or asking her to do. And while I'm on the subject of asking horses to do something, if she says no or Billy says no, you know, I accept that. I don't push it. So I always want their training to be positive, and whether I'm using food treats or not, I do a lot of praise and rewarding after it. And I also have taught them things like to feel free after the end of a training session, because I think it's mentally important for them to let down. You know, so when you're thinking about taking on horses, or you're thinking about starting a project, you really need to ask those questions about what is that you want from your horses, what is your style of training, does it fit with those horses' personalities, what sort of training they've had beforehand, if any, have they come from an abused situation like Bill. You know, there's a lot of things that you have to ask yourself before you start working on your horse and work out where your skill level is. You know, look, on my own level, I've got extensive psychological training, so I use a lot of behavioural sort of techniques on my horses, and it suits me, but that's not for everybody. You know, so probably the number one lesson I think when it comes to handling horses and training them is use your common sense. You know, don't overestimate your own abilities. Be safe. You know, I always try and be safe. It mightn't always look like that when I'm you know, taking videos of the horses, but often I am actually behind a fence like I am right now. So if these two decide they want to have a bit of a squabble, they can't actually run me over because I'm on the other side of the fence. And in terms of who would actually run me over and who wouldn't, Bella's much less mindful of my space. When she loses a nanny, she forgets about what's around her, and she doesn't do it intentionally. She's not mean at all, but she doesn't always think about what's going on around her. Whereas Bill is different. Bill is always mindful where I am, and he would jump over me before he'd land on top of me, and he would avoid me and collide into something himself versus collide into me. And the reason I know that is that when I first got him, I was 90% blind, used to have a lot of falls on the ground. When I first broke him in, or gentled him, or backed him, however you want to say it, when I used to get off him, soon as my legs hit the ground, because I've had a muscle problem, and because I've got a couple of genetic diseases, sometimes my muscles in my legs wouldn't work properly, and when I touched the ground, down I would go, rolling around like Birdie Beetle. And so Bill got used to me being down at his feet, and it never worried him. So he's super safe. And you know, when it comes down to trust, I definitely trust him more than I trust Bella, and with good reason, because as I said, she can be flighty and reactive. She's much more moody. You know, hormones. She's not always moody, but when she's in season, she can be an absolute witch and very unthinking about what's going on. Other times when she's with it, though, she's brilliant. But them's the joys of owning a mare versus owning a gelding, I think. I think I'll go in now and leave these horses to sleep off the afternoon. I've got plenty of housework to do. I'll keep putting it off and procrastinating, but then who doesn't? I'm a typical horsey woman. Much rather spend time with my horses than go inside and do boring old housework. Anyway, if you like our channel, please like and subscribe and get to know what it's like to own a Brumby. That's the sole aim of my channel, really, is to show people that owning a Brumby can be a really fun and enjoyable experience, and that when you buy a horse, think in the long term. You know, they're not commodities, they're flesh and blood, they've got feelings and personalities, and they bond with each other and they bond with us. And so think long and hard before you decide to buy that project horse, because too many end up on the sales merry-go-round. Too many end up, you know, in abusive situations. Too many end up with all kinds of problems that, you know, the next owner finds really hard to have to deal with. There's too many horses out there for experienced homes only, and the reason for that is the foundations that people put into their horses are usually poor quality. And so look, you know, think long and hard about that project Brumby, but if you really want to do it, you know, get on the social media sites, come and have a look at the Australian Wild Brumby Association, which I started. I put everybody's websites who are credible onto that group page, so you can have a look at all the different rehomers, you can have a look at the different Brumby groups, you can have a look at the different causes that are there. There's some excellent trainers on there if you want to buy a Brumby but you don't have the experience to gentle one. You know, that site's fantastic for that. And if you're, you know, just want to know what it's like living with horses and living with a Brumby, stay tuned, watch the channel, and hopefully you'll enjoy. Thanks everyone.